this is entertaining. There is a solid 2-second delay from my webcam and that one. So, I just need it for reference so that we don't.
Rodin Futura brought to you delayed from the studio in, I wouldn't even say where.
our undisclosed hidden layer.
Right, yes.
where everything is secret and perhaps crumbling around us.
Yes.
My goodness.
Yep.
It's nuts. But yeah. I think we're good.
We should get over the tech debacles and everything it takes to bootstrap everything together to get this thing going.
I know. Well, I will put this out there. So if people, because I don't know, for example, like how many people are in the crossover space where they listen or they watch, video, for example.
Yes, yeah.
But if anyone's ever curious as to like this week, I didn't notice the traditional wide shot. I'm like, well, I could guarantee you it was a technical issue,
right?
Because to our credit, I said we have I would say I should take a picture, but my phone is over there.
Yes.
I should take it when we're done. If you can remind me, I'll take a picture that we can post so people can see what we see.
Right. The actual setup here.
And I will take a moment because as frustrated as we can get, it's also like we are pulling off a pretty elaborate like production scheme when it's just the two of us. And when we're in the middle of podcasts, we don't have a producer with us. So we're
this is everything. Yes.
Yeah.
So, but the irony is as well that with the setup, it's 10% audio, 90% video. But then when we get to the listeners, it's 90% audio and 10% video.
I know.
Something doesn't add up here.
I know it. Well, and it's interesting because I keep paying attention, and if anyone is listening and they have thoughts on this, please let us know because I keep hearing over and over again that YouTube is the new podcast location.
Yeah,
which is interesting because I'm like.
In some
it's a video
small, far-flung corner of the world that we're not aware of.
Yeah,
because certainly it's not the big medium with us at the moment.
I know. Well, what's crazy is even in the YouTube studio thing, I got a notice yesterday or something that was like, just so you know, all of your video channels have been labeled as podcasts. I'm like, okay, that's good, I guess, But yeah, it's interesting. But yes, I don't want to publicly admit the amount of time and effort, as you mentioned, that goes into the media production that gets, less views than I would like.
Yes,
let's just put it that way.
One day it's going to blow up and people are going to realize how much fun it is to actually watch us having conversations rather than just listen to us.
I think
and it is actually, and I would say it is worth it. From the shorts on YouTube, so if anybody hasn't checked out the shorts where Sean just picks out sort of little snippets of the conversation on YouTube, they're actually worth watching. But even I think it's great just actually watching us in the studio. There's something you get from that you don't get from just listening.
It is. And I think it's kind of fun too, because again, I look at these things and so for me, it doesn't end with our record, right? It's like the record.
That's the beginning of your journey.
The beginning of the journey. And then it's the edit. And then I rough block in the things. And so by the time, it reaches people's ears or eyes, I have seen it too many times.
Right.
But it is, I'll find myself, this may be slightly narcissistic perhaps, but I find myself enjoying just seeing this play out again. Cause it's interesting because when I'm, again, you just relive that experience and it's different from a different perspective. But
so everybody now realizes the reason we make these podcasts is for Sean to feel good about himself as he listens to them through the week. It's nothing to do with the audience.
Some people have, nice, full home speaker systems to play lovely music on whatever. When you walk into my house, it's just Modem Futura
playing on a continuous loop.
Oh my gosh! Could you imagine?
I know. With that, we should probably move on very fast.
Yeah.
To the topic of today.
Let's do that. So I'll just tease it up really quick, and then we'll cut for a break and we'll intro the show. But yeah, I keep coming up with these ideas, and I think, we should talk about this, and then of course something happens in the AI world, and then you're like, oh well, we have to talk about that because it's happening, it's new. And I think this week is kind of, we'll start there anyway. That's kind of no exception.
See where it goes,
so big things, big announcements happened, I think about a week ago. So end of March, and with essentially like new, OpenAI released the ChatGPT 4.0, their image generator, their native image generator.
Yep.
And of course that has kicked off, or maybe not kicked off, but it has renewed a lot of conversations around what does this mean in terms of how are these AI systems creating these works. That there's the technology behind them. Yep. There's the social implications. There's the IP implications. Right. There's lots to explore.
Yep.
So I say we'll take
lots of controversy. So
yes. So let's take a quick break and then we'll jump right into it.
Initializing waveform.
Modulating signals for transmission.
Exploring the possible, probable, and preferable futures.
Welcome to Modem Futura. Okay,
we're back.
Our breaks are I enjoy our quick breaks.
Right.
You know, had to go run and get some coffee. Make sure all the tech stack is still working, which it is. But and so again, I'm on a mission now with Every Time to redeem myself for the introduction flub of before, which I thoroughly enjoyed that because that happens. And we were just talking a little bit before we hit the record button. These moments where you're like, don't forget to do the thing. Don't missay that word. And then you get to it and you're like,
Yeah. So what are you forgetting now, Sean?
I'm not going to screw this up this time. I promise. But anyway, I would like to introduce ourselves and the show to our new listeners. And of course, a friendly hello to those who have been with us for some time. So I'm Sean Leahy, joined with my amazing co-host,
Andrew Maynard.
And that means this is Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and explores the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like, what does it mean to be human in the future? And so obviously throughout the show, if you've been a longtime listener or if you're new, you've got a wonderful catalog to go back on, covering lots of things. We've been covering AI for, a
while now.
Yeah, I mean, different touch points since the beginning.
This is the show that desperately tries to stay away from AI, and we get sucked in nearly every single week.
Yep. It's one of those things where you're like, wait, but something new has happened and we must discuss.
Yes.
Because, so again, kind of going back, so OpenAI and it's the image generation, let's just start a little bit further back.
Yep.
Generative AI systems, of course, if we go back to, the Cambrian explosion of these Gen AI systems, so late November 2022, all the, ChatGPT bursts onto the scene. Very quickly then we have follow-ups with like image generating generative
which
AI
actually
tools.
Came before, if you remember. Even. Yes, yeah.
And that's a piece too. It might be worth just a quick pause. For people who maybe just coming to this or haven't known, the generative AI technology behind, we lump these things into this category called generative AI, right? Yep. These things that are creating, these machines and systems that are creating outputs that mimic the outputs that they were trained on, but how they do it is completely different.
Right, yes.
In fact, in the image side, there's many different models. There's a diffusion model, which you'll hear also like, there's also names like stable diffusion and things like this that use the term right in their title. There's also one that's the GAN, the General Adversarial Network.
Yes,
which is that's a really someone will have to fact check me. I think that's the oldest of those sort of more contemporary
it's
ones,
right?
Right?
Yes, yeah.
Because that's the one
whole stable of these methods to generate these images.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so they're not the same thing as large language models, which is the text-based generative AI tools, but in some ways, they work similarly in terms of a user engages with them with some sort of natural language prompt.
Yep.
And then the machine uses its training and its understanding of what you're asking for and delivers you an output
image, that
is in some ways constructed based on the information that has been trained on. So it is, in some ways, they're similar, but also in terms of their technology and underlying functions are very different.
Right.
And it was, I remember when DALL-E.
Which I think was the first one that really hit the public scene in a big way.
Big time.
Remember those early pictures of astronauts on horses on the moon?
That was so I don't know where someone like that particular phrasing I think stuck, and everyone was like, well, that's how you test these things. Astronaut on a horse with or a cat on a horse. But I recall, and I probably should have looked this up because I'm going to probably get the dates wrong. But I remember also even before, I think it was the summer before. So this would have been the summer of 22. DALL-E was making headways because for the first time it was really starting to threaten art The art,
Right.
it was,
Yes.
I forget that it was a photography competition, I believe. And it was the image that won relied and had some artificial elements.
I remember that. I don't remember the dates, but I remember the fuss that created where somebody had submitted something. I believe they didn't actually flag it as AI. I can't remember. But,
I think
suddenly it won the competition because it felt so realistic.
I do love it. We're like, I don't remember. Me
Right,
either.
yes.
We probably could just ask ChatGPT real
Welcome
quick.
to our world of ignorance.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I think we made the joke the other day, worth repeating. Two people who have a slightly informed opinion on something on the internet. It's like, that's what the internet is, right? But going back to that, I remember distinctly, I was on a walk and I was listening to a different podcast and they were talking about that. And I remember at that moment having this almost like a visceral reaction to just that understanding that this thing, and knowing that this marked in some ways one of the first times that these generative tools was actually threatening something that was previously, we the humans, we make art.
We thought, yes, we were special in this. Especially must be to you as a photographer, sort of seeing how this played out.
Yeah, and it's like you can do spreadsheets and you can do the machine learning stuff, but art is humans, right?
Our soul is ours.
That's right.
Keep your hands off.
Because previously, computer art. I mean, I think there was again, I'm gonna butcher all of these. I'll try to find these and put them in the show notes so you can click on them. But there was it was a digital painting that an AI system had done that sold at auction at like Sotheby's or something. And when you look at this, you're like, you're like, ugh, okay. You're like, it's an object and you can critique it in that way. But from an aesthetic, like it was definitely stood out, right? And so there was this notion that was like, and if you had seen the imagery that was coming out of a lot of these systems, I mean, they were awful. Pictures of humans, right? Air quote, right? Which is just like, I mean, a sort of a photographic Picasso and, not good.
But it's interesting. So if you go back to the latter half of 2022, that's when people started realizing that there were photo quality images being produced. And that's when I had a colleague that alerted me to this, actually with another platform, Midjourney, but also looking at DALL-E, where you could produce photos of people or images of people that looked like they were real people and real photos until people started counting the fingers and things like that. But we got over that. But that was one of the glitches in early days. But I think it really shocked people. And remember the image, I can't remember the date of this. It may be slightly after the beginning. That image that circulated of the Pope in a puffer jacket.
Oh, yeah.
And people suddenly realized, it was disturbing that somebody could actually create what looked like a genuine photo of the Pope in clothing that he wouldn't wear. But so the realism was there, but also the invasion of what somebody is and what their public presence is, I think disturbed people as well, their public image.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found, absolutely. And I looked up too, there was an article, it was, I just lost it. Of course. But it was the picture called The Twin Sisters in Love, which was the one that had won that art contest. And then, of course, the creator, it was like, yes, that was using AI as well. But yeah, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned the fingers thing, but early on, so even like DALL-E, when that was sort of pressing and you would do these pictures, like, have it do this thing. And even then, it was impressive, but you're like, but we can tell.
You could see
we
the
can
glitches,
tell.
yes.
And also the resolution. The resolution is in photography, especially, is a big one where when you were constrained to these small resolution images that these generators would create, you could also detect. You're like, but that's not even print quality. It's just they're very they have heavy artifacts in them. And things like the anomalies, right? Like 9 fingers on one hand, or just these bizarre, like
a random head somewhere.
Misplaced body parts, and weird things like like a hand going through a wall, or lots of.
But it's also been interesting. So, 2 interesting things there. One is the number of people who I still hear say AI image generation is no good because they don't get body parts right. That is a thing of the past. Yes, there are still glitches, but largely that has been solved. So the image generators of today are nothing like the image generators of 2 years ago. That just underlines how far things have come. So yes, you talk about sort of these visual glitches and the resolution from 2 years ago. The images today are stunning. I mean, yes, they still have their problems. I think somebody posted one the other day with a group photo with an extra head there. I think it was actually in somebody's lap. So yes, there are ways in which you can sometimes tell that it's AI. That I don't think is the big issue here. The big issue is just how impressive this technology is, glitches and all.
Yeah, and and then again, just thinking about. And don't worry, we will be getting to the new one here.
Right, yes.
But it's worth understanding too. So I mean, originally DALL-E was sort of like, yeah, it does things, but it's flawed.
Yep.
Midjourney came along.
Yep.
Midjourney was sort of, I think, quickly took a leap in front in terms of, because at that time too, the degree that you could specify like photorealistic.
Yep.
And you can even, which is interesting for people who have worked in like digital imaging and photography, you could actually ask for specific lens profiles.
Right, yes.
So you could say like, I want a picture of like Andrew, but he's a frog in a forest. And I want it a portraiture with like a Canon 1.8, aperture, 50 millimeter lens.
Taken at the magic hour with a particular
exactly
diffuse
golden
light.
hour
Yes,
with a nice
yes.
soft, and it would produce an image that had those qualities.
Right.
And I think what was neat about Midjourney at the time too is it would give you these results back, and then you could continuously fine tune them, as opposed to DALL-E, which was much more of like a one shot done, and then you could redo it. But Midjourney would allow you to essentially
tweak a little bit,
continue
yes,
to
yes,
tweak down
yep.
these like pathways of
Yes,
imagery,
yep.
Which we've talked about before too. Of our, you define a style and using these tools,
and you actually move into it. And we may get into that because I've been using Midjourney for my art on my Substack and other places for a couple of years now. And it's really interesting to look at that division between just generating images and how you interactively use the tool as an artist's tool.
Well, and even just if you haven't gone, this is a good time to encourage people to visit the Future of Being Human website at asu.edu.
Yes.
And the visual images there are
actually everything, very intentionally, everything on that web, or most of the headers and most of the banners are generated in Midjourney. And it was very intentional in terms of looking at the aesthetic and the content that we wanted and working with AI to capture that.
Yeah. And now, in a way, right, that process has also created the visual, in some ways, like brand identity is a little too far because we have our own with university brand standards, of course. But within that, there's a recognition between like the Substack. There's a visual continuity of that sort of theme and that sort of like the visuals and stuff like that to let you know that this is.
See, that's it. And actually a good example of that is, yes, if you go to the Substack, the Future of Being Human Substack, most of the posts, I actually generate an image using Midjourney for those posts. And there is an aesthetic which is common to most of them. Yeah. And that is because of how I specifically work with Midjourney to get that aesthetic that I want.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. If you have experience using a tool like that, what's interesting is you find like a groove. You do, yes. And if you disrupt that groove, sometimes it's hard to get back into it. I've spent many times where I'm like, I want this because, one of the things, it's a frivolous use, but one of the things I use Midjourney most for in like a daily thing is I make wallpapers for my mobile, my iPhone.
Yep.
They're great because you can have them. They're fun and they're just endless, right? But you'll get like a certain thing and you're like, I want it to look like a, retro, NASA poster from 1960 or whatever. Right.
And suddenly you're back to the frog in the forest.
Yeah. And then it gives you something. You're like, no. I was so close before. And
right.
then,
and it just slips away.
Yeah. And then you can't get it back. Yeah. But so even when those things kicked off, right? So then the conversation that very quickly came afterwards was, of course, around similar to like ChatGPT and large language models. It was like, well, hey, wait a minute.
What do these train on?
Who said you could train? Because perhaps more so than written text on the internet, visual, I shouldn't say more so, but I would say in the community of artists and photographers and, illustrators and media producers, we have long held a very protective stance on the image.
Yes.
Because that's always been something that's been lifted and stolen and used without permission.
Right.
For a long time. Even just personally, I don't know if we want to get into my personal, but like I've throughout my career, I have held back a lot of my work to not have it be publicly available on the internet for that exact reason. It shows up in weird places. People use it for CD covers and things you're like, oh,
and it raises that whole question of intellectual property and ownership over things that you've actually produced and generated from yourself, your own skills, your own life experience.
Yeah. And I think, there's been lots of court cases that I think it's the jury is still out.
Yeah.
See what I did there?
But actually, we should check on the latest. But certainly there was a ruling not so long ago that indicated that certainly you can't copyright AI generated stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's AI generated, not human generated, and copyright laws are all about what humans have produced. And so that has sort of muddied the water a little bit more murky there. But certainly morally and ethically, there is this huge debate about what it is appropriate to use. And just to give people a sense of it, for quite some time now with these AI image generators, you've been able to generate pieces of art that take elements of established artists and either replicate their work or replicate work that looks like it might have been made by them. So the question is, if you're basically, or if the AI is drawing on their talent, their experience, their aesthetic, their vision, just how appropriate is it?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think, I think there's been you would say on the first glance, you're like, oh, that's fair game to get like the art masters, right? So people, the Rembrandt styles and these things, right? But then very quickly that conversation shifted to, living artists.
That's right. People who make literally a living from their art.
Yeah. And I feel like there was a massive one with, who's the guy, Thomas Kincaid. I think there was a big lawsuit or something around, same thing. It was like, you can't use that. And then of course we've seen on the LLM side of things, there's been the big lawsuit with New York Times and, a lot of book authors and people were signing on to this. But even, I still remember going back when this technology first came out. One of the things, I remember speaking about this was also with the speed at which these are moving to are setting up a massive challenge for just the legal frameworks.
That's right. Yes.
The regulation.
It's new ground. Yes.
It's new ground. These things move way faster.
And I would even say it's new ethical ground. So it's very easy to retreat into this idea that what I produce is mine. It's personal. There's value to it. And I want to be able to make money from it or identify myself through it. But it's all down to the individual. And that is a particular stance that is certainly sort of grounded in part in Western philosophy, although it goes beyond that, but in part in terms of how we think about value creation in a market economy. Yeah. You hold on to what you have of value and you eke that out. I actually think that this is challenging how we think about value creation and about how we think about our personal intellectual property. So it's not black and white. It's not as if we want to try and maintain the world as it is and fend off the incursions of AI. I think we've got to reevaluate what it means to create value and what it means to share value.
Yeah, absolutely. I would add on to that that's one side of the conversation. The other piece is also from more of like the legal framework is the rules that we had. And today is not the day where we debate whether copyright was meant for the actual creators or just the publishers. That's a different conversation.
Yes.
But we don't have the proper way of talking about what is happening. So we're still, again, because it's the speed and this disparity between we're trying to apply rules around, again, intellectual copyright, things like that are traditionally have only been meant for human behavior.
See, that's right. Yes.
And we're trying to apply that to something that is not human behavior. That's it. It doesn't work.
No. And this is where it stretches things. And I think we should be clear here that when you're looking at AI generated stuff, these are dumb AIs. They're intelligent in that they can create something that looks like it was created by a human, but there is no self-awareness, no internal thought process there that is human-like.
That's right. There's no understanding.
They're following a process, and it's an incredibly sophisticated, amazing process, but an AI has no awareness of what it's produced or the value of what it's produced. It just produces stuff. And the value comes from what we as humans put on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the pieces, I think that was real interesting in where we are sort of now, as you mentioned, the sort of in the US, the rule was, well, the output of an AI is not copyrightable as from the AI.
Right.
Now, the individual can use output and be copyrighted as like my work that was using these tools and stuff. Yeah. But that's the other piece too, is you get into this argument of, which I think is really fascinating because the generative AI tools, you might be able to sort of coerce them eventually with a heavy-handed approach. but normally their job, they don't reproduce the item that they were trained on.
They take bits from many, many things. And actually, so this is generative in a couple of ways. It's generative in that AI is generating something, but it's generative in that it's actually creating something new by combining little bits and pieces from multiple sources.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of like the issue. And I think, going back to this law, I think it was the New York Times that was like, it'll spit back our entire articles, which in the end, it was shown that they were heavily like basically feeding it these things to like finish my sentence sort of a thing.
So it's somewhat forced.
It's somewhat forced. But I think more broadly, one of the main pieces of this conversation, this challenge is like the machine is ingesting this material, and that material, now there is a question there in terms of how they're getting that material, right? What's fair in this? I mean, Facebook famously was caught sort of downloading things, on, essentially BitTorrenting these massive amounts of data, which is like, okay.
In fact, there's now a database where you can search it to find out whether your particular publication was part of its training set. And actually, both of my books were, although that's also interesting because I'm pleased that they were there. Although many people would say it would be nice to have been asked whether you're okay.
Yeah. And, and you'll see this too. I mean, I know people, they've been putting essentially little tokens in for web crawlers to basically say like, please don't, as you can do this, you can say, don't index my site.
Yes.
You can also say like, please don't train on my site. But again, that's who's listening to that.
Right.
But it's, and I think we've talked about before, we've mentioned the blob before, right?
Yeah, I think we have.
Which is,
refresh us
essentially,
about the blob.
Yeah, essentially the blob is this incredibly massive data set that has been created and increased over time that is basically the representation of all information, images, text, video, whatever is out there, that this blob basically exists. And the challenge with it, right, is like when you train these models for them to be effective, you have to give it as much as you can possibly give it. And then, it pulls these things and it doesn't retain. And that's maybe something that might also help people who, if they haven't like dug into this in depth, when these models train on the data, they don't retain like, oh, I didn't retain Andrew's, the copy of the photograph that you posted online. They train from it and they extract essentially the tokenized version.
That's
from
right.
that.
The essence of it. Yes.
And then when they're creating something new, depending on, again, which type of technology they're using, it's building from those tokenized, those elements to assemble whatever it is that they're creating. But it's fascinating because that's the piece is like you see styles, you see things that are clearly in the hand of, and you can directly ask for it, or maybe it can happen serendipitously.
Yes. And we'll get to this when we talk about the latest iteration.
Yeah, and maybe this is a perfect time to kind of bring that in, because essentially with this new, and I will say this as last bit before we get in, is ChatGPT and DALL-E, which they've dropped DALL-E as you don't hear of it anymore.
I think they must have done, and I was never impressed. So DALL-E was integrated into ChatGPT, so you could ask it to create an image, and it would.
But brand-wise, I feel like it's just kind of disappeared.
Yeah, and I think it has because OpenAI have now got their own sort of native image generator.
Yeah. But originally, again, so going back to when we were talking about like Midjourney and things, and there's a whole bunch. Stable Diffusion was an interesting one.
Yep.
That was one of the first open models I was able to download. I used to run it on an iPad, which was kind of cool. But DALL-E was kind of like, the images weren't where you went.
Right.
But what's been amazing since the launch of OpenAI's new native image generator is how good it is.
It is.
When I say good, that's also coming from like you have fewer issues of random limbs. You have very realistic looking images, high quality images. We've also learned, and there's plenty of other AI tools that can upscale images. So that idea of like these being low resolution and easily spot no longer really holds as much. So now we have this new image generator that is crazy cool. Very, compelling.
And just to show how cool people think it is, I saw reports. So if you remember when ChatGPT was launched, it was one of the fastest growing websites ever in terms of the number of subscribers. And OpenAI are now saying with the launch of this new image generator, they've seen almost sort of a faster sort of adoption of people with ChatGPT than they saw initially. Apparently, so the numbers of people subscribing to the service and trying this out have just been through the roof.
Yeah. And I was trying to look for, like I just saw yesterday, the note. But yeah, I mean, it was basically something along the lines of, what took them, I think it was like 5 months to build or something. They did in 1 week.
Right. Yes.
In terms of the number of people.
So it shows how interested people are in this this capability. I would say the other thing about this, which actually is transformative, is the way that it integrates with the ChatGPT large language model. So now, rather than just giving your image generator a prompt and seeing what it comes up with, you can talk with the system. You can talk it through what you want. You can brainstorm what you want the image to be, and then it starts to create it, and then you can iterate around just by talking with the AI. So effectively, I mean, if anybody's been watching the terminology here, we talk about sort of vibe computing and vibe this,
vibe
that,
coding.
and the other. Vibe coding, which is basically just having a conversation with your AI. So now this is vibe image generation.
Right. And hey, we've been vibe podcasting for a while, we'll corner that part, right? But that's very true, and I think what that again is one of the things that this tool is. I'm impressed, and and to be honest, not that I'm special in any regard, but I'm like I'm harder to impress with these tools because again, you understand so much of the hype, and it's like show me the receipts, and then when you start using it and you actually go, okay, this is actually pretty good. Where you're like, all right, I can see, So
we should talk about what good means to you.
Sure. Well, good. Number one threshold when using an AI generated tool is that it gives you something right off the bat that is, I would say, within 70% of what you were thinking of getting. Because there's this disconnect when you're like, you have an image in your mind, or you have it could be rough or very specific, and you ask for something, and how close what you get to that is one of the initial points of friction. This used to drive me nuts, especially with the older system, right? You'd say, give me a picture with no text. And you get an image full of text. And then you're like, no, I said no text. And then it comes back, sorry about that. I'll render you a new image with no text. More text.
Right.
And you're like, no, I said no text at all. I can see it here. Remove it. There should be no letters, no alphanumeric, anything.
This is what the AI rubber brick is for, to throw at the wall when you hit that point of utter frustration.
At one point, I kid you not, the one time I went through this, and I probably went, because I was like, I'm going to see how long this takes. And it was probably a solid 15, 20 minutes of back and forth. And it never removed the text.
Well, once it's got in a rut,
because of course it doesn't know what text is. Right.
It's just pixels on a screen.
Pixels that form a letter and all this kind of stuff. But it was just what was so amusing to me is this cycle of frustration where you're like, and it'll say, congratulations, Sean. Don't worry. Sorry about all that. Here's a new image. I guarantee it has no text in it whatsoever. Full of text. Right. And then you get to this point where like, I'm going to go insane. I'm going insane arguing with this thing.
Yes.
And then that little nugget of doubt starts to seep in, and you're like, maybe there isn't any text there. Maybe I'm just making that up as I'm seeing it.
Par for the course in this day and age. You put up a text-filled AI-generated image and you say, there is no text here.
There's
and
no
you
text.
just defy people to sort of
like
believe you rather than believe their eyes.
The ultimate digital gaslight. Like, there's no text here. You're like, right, maybe that isn't text. Maybe
that's the t-shirt. There is no text.
There's no text. I've been wrong all the time. Show me the way, AI system. But yeah, so getting close to what you want when you ask for it. Also too, especially if you're asking for a photographic representation, is to not have essentially anatomical inconsistencies with things that can't be possible. And again, if you want that, or you ask for abstract, which is a really fun space to play in, great. But when you're saying like, I want a photo, or you give it a photo and you're asking it to manipulate that photo, and it comes back with like, you're now just, your torsos have been separated, and it's like, no. So for me, that's a big issue. Also is looking at the sort of, well, in the photography world, we'll say like pixel peeping, where you zoom into 100% and you're looking at essentially the crispness of the lines. So you want to see a clear definition, not fuzzy lines, but also looking for just the image fidelity. How much of this image is actually high quality versus, again, smudgy.
Yes, yep.
And because that determines what you can do with it in terms of, we have web and things that have lower resolution, no problem. But for things like 4K video, for print, for things like that, if you have these things at larger resolutions, very quickly, the quality is such where you're like, that's not usable. So my thing was always, and if you've done work with like animation or stop motion, right, you can build these sequences of film or motion using many images. But those images individually have to be high enough quality.
Of course, yes.
And and now with other tools like Runway and these a whole bunch. It's another Stability AI has another motion graphic tool that can take like a single shot and build you like a 360.
Build it out. Yes.
I mean, we're getting, or maybe not topic for today. Maybe we'll get some Hollywood people in to talk with us about it, but getting closer to a point where the outputs for the average person with access to these tools, potentially really cool things that would hold up in terms of our traditional critical view on the quality of the imagery. That
You're already beginning to see that. Yes.
Yeah. And so those are exciting. So from my perspective, when I say they're pretty good, that's the kind of threshold that they're ticking for me. Now, they're not perfect.
Yes.
They make mistakes still. I still got one with, I think I was showing you the other day, I got one with 3 hands.
Right,
again.
yes.
Now, the hands had the right number of fingers and stuff. There was just,
well, that's good. That's progress.
There was just an extra one.
Right.
So they're not perfect by any stretch.
But this is also really important because there are so many people out there that I think will look for gotcha moments and sort of say, oh, this is a lousy technology because they spotted a flaw in an image. So the technology is absolutely not perfect.
No.
I mean, what is?
And no,
but I think you need to understand in an open-minded way what it's good for, where its limitations are. And one of those things that it's good for, I would add to your list, is actually going back to text, the inclusion of text. So one of the things that has been really frustrating with these AI image generators is if you wanted text, it would give you garbage. Because it simply didn't understand sort of what text meant in an image. OpenAI have nearly cracked that. So you can ask it to generate an image with text in, and 9 times out of 10, it will get it right. That 1 time out of 10, you will still get a little bit of garbage. And actually, the more text you want, the more likely it is that you're going to get garbage there. But it is still deeply impressive how it deals with text in images.
It is. In fact, so one of the things, I think just kind of we've been hiding it for some reason. And we'll bring it up. But one of the big, a controversial element of the new image generator, because it is so good, is also, again, asking it to do things in certain styles, right?
Yes.
And one of those styles is the Studio Ghibli. Does that,
we checked this with OpenAI. They claimed that Studio Ghibli, but they claimed that we wouldn't be lynched if we said Ghibli. And I've always said Studio Ghibli.
Studio Ghibli. Is this a GIF situation here? It's like, So I'm sorry. What's it? Ghibli?
I say Ghibli.
Okay, we'll go with Ghibli.
Yes,
we'll go with Ghibli.
Okay, yes. Yeah. And
send the hate mail. You know where to find us. So famously, this is a very famous illustration.
Style. Yes. These absolutely beautiful animated films. I mean, many people will be very, very familiar with these sort of films like Spirited Away and many, many others. I'm just all painstakingly hand drawn and painted. In a very distinctive style.
Very distinctive. And that just, and again, so this is coming, I'm going to attempt the name here. And if I get it wrong, the deepest of apologies, but it's Hayao Miyazaki.
Yes.
And again, with this iconic style, like the Studio Ghibli sort of visual style is instantly recognizable.
Yes,
I mean, I've never actually seen any of the films myself, but I know of them just because of their style.
You recognize
and because of the fan interest. When you see people, for example, like Comic-Con or anything where people go all out for these things, and you recognize these characters, and you're like, oh, I've never seen it, but I know that character and I know what it's from. For like, My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, and of course, the Spirited Away, I think is the most recent one, right?
There have been actually a few since then, but that's one of the better known ones. Yes.
So fascinating, but one of the things that has sort of taken off as like a viral craze, if you will, if for the kids out there, we still use that term. I don't know, viral stuff. I don't know. But is using the chat, because it's also available for everybody, even the free accounts, they can get access to it. and using the new image generator to create or turn images into the Studio Ghibli framing.
This is something that the new image generator on ChatGPT can explicitly do. And in fact, if you ask it what styles can you emulate, it will say Studio Ghibli is one of them. And there has just been this massive outpouring of people either putting images in saying, recreate this image in the style of Studio Ghibli, or sort of create a new image. And they are good. And they've been flooding the internet. If anybody sort of looked at these, and they're eye-poppingly amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I did one myself.
Right.
And I'll share it.
And I haven't, simply because of the controversy. And the controversy is, first of all, did OpenAI illicitly train their model on a gazillion frames of Studio Ghibli movies and basically sort of rip that intellectual property from the studio and the creators? And is this an inappropriate infringement of IP? Either legally, probably not, but ethically and morally, it might be. So I'm actually conflicted about this, but I haven't actually done this because of that.
Yep, I was conflicted, and I asked it specifically. Mm-hmm. So here's where you can. I'll share my dilemma that's ongoing.
Yes,
I created an image using it's just one of the images of us in our studio.
Of us, yes, yes.
I put it in there and I said, please do this in the style of Studio Ghibli. And it came back with a beautiful image that also got the road
right.
And I forget the term of the
slash across the O. It got that as well.
It got that as well. And it's a great rendition. Somehow it's given me a couple extra like finger guns, which I find entertaining because I don't think I talk like this, but now maybe I should.
No. You're going to be second guessing yourself.
Yeah. It captured our studio. even and again, but here's my dilemma: is I was like, I wanted to see how well this really works, because you can never, don't trust everything on the internet, kids. But also within this image itself, also the way it captured the diffused light that comes in and hits our artificial plants in here. It has this beautiful, warm, animated style, just like
it is incredibly attractive.
Yep. And so you can see why, even just from people who are like, I want that. But also it gets back to your point and I feel like I remembered somewhere that those Miyazaki films, we're talking, because again, they're hand-drawn, hand-painted watercolors and things like that, right? Going back for people who are maybe more familiar with Disney, going back to the original like cell hand-drawn, thousands and thousands of frames.
Yes.
Because, again, not to mix in too much, but if you think about it, if you watch a video at 30 frames per second, that would be for every second, you would have 30 images, right? And so extract that over the time of...
So you're talking about months to create minutes of film.
Yes. And that's a second. And in video, lots can happen in a second. Right. So you might even need more frames in 1 second to evoke motion and movement. So you can imagine that what you're talking about here is not only... a style, but also the labor of love of all of the artisans, assuming, of course, they're not mistreated and like forced to work all these tens of thousands of images. But, you're also talking about a human labor of making these tens of thousands of frames and whatever. And now, again, you get into this weird space where it's like, how do we feel then about this being able to grab
Have you somehow cheapened this?
Yeah. And theoretically... right? If I take this and extrapolate time, I should be able to say, I have a video. I can grab the frames from that.
People already doing this actually.
Now let me reverse that, put each one of those frames into ChatGPT and say, give it the same treatment, take those same frames, now put them back. Now I have an animated movie of the entire thing in that style. And that raises the big question, again, that we're circling around because there's no clear answer.
There isn't.
Legally, there could be if it was like, hey, we blatantly robbed you of your stuff and we're reproducing this and saying it's yours.
Yes.
Clearly, that would be an open and shut sort of copyright intellectual property issue. But the issue comes back to me where I'm still really stuck on this is the right to train, the right to learn, the right to absorb. Because we as humans do this all the time.
That's right. Yes.
Right. If I was an aspiring illustrator, which I'm not, but if I was, And I like the style so much that I wanted my work.
You would use that as a practice tool.
That's exactly what I would do.
Watch it. You would try and emulate it. You would
trace
develop
it.
your own
I'd
skills.
copy it. You trace it to learn the, you know, and in art, we do this all the time. You mimic the masters, you mimic the styles. Imitation is the finest form of flattery, right? Like in photography, we do this all the time. You resonate with someone's style and you basically try to emulate it until you develop your own.
That's right. Yes.
Right. The goal, like, especially if you think about like photography, for example, is the goal is not to become the next Ansel Adams. Well, you're not going to, right?
Right.
But you can use their style, you can use their techniques to get to a place where then you can start to inform your own sort of fingerprint of my style. What has the imprint of me, the individual, on this visual imagery? But that raises this question, like, well, but isn't this the same thing?
But the difference is you put effort into that.
Sure.
Whereas at the moment, anybody can generate these with no effort. And there's a line, I wish I could remember it, from the first Jurassic Park with Jeff Goldblum. It isn't the usual line of you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But it's a line about the scientists there building on the work of others and doing the stuff that was easy without the training, the discipline, the understanding to do it.
What is that line? I can hear, I know the scene.
I know, and I wish I had it in front of me, but he makes the point that science at the edge of innovation is important because of the effort that it took people to get there, the discipline that it took them to get there, the ways of thinking and problem solving and making mistakes and finding solutions. That's what gives it the value, not just coming along and ripping all that out from somebody else and doing something without understanding.
Yeah.
And I guess that the fear, at least in some places here, is what we're seeing with AI, especially in this particular case with Studio Ghibli, is there is no effort behind what you're producing. There is no understanding. There is no progression of learning your skill and actually understanding the responsibility that comes with that skill. You just press a button and you get the stuff. And somehow does that both cheapen what you get and does it undermine the whole human process? And I would say, I'm not sure I actually buy into that argument, but I think that this is an important argument.
Yeah. And I can't find the exact quote because it's deeper than this one.
It really is.
The one that the quick search comes back is maybe the more known one, but it was this, it's in the same conversation. And the quote was, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Which also applies here.
Which also applies, but it's in that convection where he talks about like they didn't.
It just precedes
they
that.
They don't appreciate the art. They don't appreciate the connectiveness of things.
So then the question to me is, with people having this ability, and it's not just Studio Ghibli style, there are actually a number of styles here. So if anybody is familiar with the old Tintin comic books, you can actually use a Tintin style as well. But the question to me is less one about intellectual property and more about, are we abdicating the responsibility that comes with learning a craft and exercising it? Or is there something different about what we're doing here, and actually different in a positive way rather than a negative way?
Yeah. So I struggle with this because there's no clear answer because it depends on perspective and scale. And when I say scale, I don't mean it in like the contemporary business terms. I mean scale is like backing up, looking at the timeline of human progression through time and space and how we move these technologies forward. And I struggle with it because, one, I'm like, so what are we saying? Or would we say that we should bar machines from being able to ingest this material? Because the counter argument that's out there is give it everything. There should be, and I think there are some recent claims and asking for like governmental regulations to be lifted.
So it's Sam Altman basically saying sort of this technology won't work unless we have the right to give it everything.
Yep.
Yes. And I can understand that. I mean, apart from the sort of cold, calculated sort of commercialism of it.
And so there's this question, right? And that's what is so sometimes difficult because if you zero down narrow enough, you can make a decision.
Yes.
But if you start to back up and broaden the view, you raise this question of, are we doing our future selves a disservice by not allowing it to just learn everything it can, ingest the world, eat the world, kind of a thing, so that we can extract more out of it later.
Yeah.
Knowing that people's intellectual property, as the mechanisms that have served us thus far, will be trampled, right? Like you had protections as a creator that maybe one person could emulate your style in a way that was close enough to pass out as a counterfeit. But now anyone can do it.
Right, yes.
And so that also, as the creator and the owner of that, must feel like someone is literally just stomping on your work.
That's right. And I think just passing that out, because I think there are a couple of things here. One is looking at making money from effectively sort of ripping stuff off. So I think one of the boundaries here is, if somebody worked out that they could create a Studio Ghibli style movie within a matter of hours using AI, and they could palm it off as if it came from Studio Ghibli, clearly wrong. Because then effectively you're not only robbing the creators of the original movies from their professional identity, but you're robbing them of the ability to actually make money, create value for themselves from that.
There's harm. There's demonstrable
harm. There's absolutely harm there. But it's a different case when, saying you've got a 5-6-year-old child who is absolutely delighted because they can take a picture that they like, a picture of themselves or their family, and they can recreate it in a style that they love. So there you can see the huge value to the child. But at the same time, you can imagine people that slave is the wrong word, spend hours and days and months over creating these, thinking there's no appreciation for me in there. So that's a hit to their ego. And I don't think those two are in the same category at all. They're even not in the same category where, if that child gets delighted by this and it inspires them to dig more into the human generated content, because then you've got a positive value from this. It's now a pathway towards the child beginning to understand the true value of the original.
Yeah. And I think, again, this is a hard one.
It is really hard.
Because the other piece too that I'll throw in is, again, with the right to, and I say right as this not as a legal term necessarily, although that's ultimately what will have to be decided. But it is this idea of the right to learn. That is, in some ways, especially in the United States, is almost inseparable from, in some cases, like the First Amendment element, where it's like you can't, while you can be controlled on what you can say in certain places, no one can control what you're allowed to learn. Right. So, and once you learn it, that's you've learned it, and then you have every right to then use what you've learned. At the moment, we
can't regulate what's inside your head. At least
not yet.
Not at the moment.
Get anything implants in there? Right. Oh my goodness, that'll be a nightmare right there. But that's kind of the challenge, is like, once you've learned something, regardless of whether or not you learned on something you should have. Right. So go back to something more simplistic. If someone stole a book from the library or a book, and it was like, here, read this stolen book, and you read it. The information that you read cannot be taken from you.
Right.
You can get in trouble for stealing the book, but you can't get in trouble for reading what was in it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so when we apply that, and again,
I see where this is going. To justify your use of ChatGPT. You didn't steal the images. You just read the book.
I just read the book. But that's part of the claim that a lot of people are putting on the systems themselves, right? So, because there's interesting stories and things about the training models and some of the illicit ways people are getting that content. However, once the thing is trained, it's like, but that's what, and again, what makes it so difficult is we don't have a way of talking about what is happening in the ingestion, training, and output of these AI systems in a way that is unique to them. We are still trying to apply what we would apply to you and I.
That's right, yes.
In a way, and again, it just doesn't work. So it creates this weird sort of mishmash of, it kind of applies here, but then it doesn't apply here. Because that's the question then, is if humans can do that, and we're building these machines essentially in the image of humans in terms of replicating and being able to ingest information and recreate that information, would that same philosophy apply to them? Which would mean, the caveat being you should get the material legally. But they should be able to ingest and learn from everything and anything that's available, that's out there, and then do whatever they want with it, recreate whatever they want. And then, so again, when you look at it, you might first say, well, yeah, but that is like, no, we can't do that.
This is where we've got to, I think, readjust our sense and understanding of personal value and intellectual property and value to other people that comes out of this. So I wanted to ask you a question in this within this respect, because I'm garbling my words here. Let's try and get this out.
We're Vibecasting.
We are Vibecasting.
Coin. Anyone who's listening, we got it first.
We are Vibecasting. Yeah. So what I wanted to get at is the difference between stuff that is generated by a machine and stuff that's generated by people. So I wanted to go back to you as a photographer.
Sure.
So now you're living in a world where AI can generate stunning simulated photos from scenes that never existed. And people can look at them and think, that is amazing. As a photographer, do you feel threatened by that? Or is there something intrinsic to your craft that makes you feel it's different and people are going to understand the difference?
Yeah, I'll answer it in kind of two ways. One is there's a difference between the act of creating photographs as an art versus a business.
Right.
So as a business, sure, there's a lot of threat there because if that's what you're,
if that's what people are paying you for,
you're in trouble. It's hard, right? Artistically, the question is who are you making that art for?
Right.
If I would answer it, and this is just me, I make that art for myself.
Right.
If other people enjoy what I make, that's great, but that's not necessarily, and it feels good, right? But that's not the intent.
But there isn't a financial transaction.
There's not a financial transaction. I mean, occasionally, but that's not the point. The point is that I'm making the art, and it's the expression, it's the process of doing it that that is fulfilling.
Okay. Yes.
Seeing the output, I mean, there's the whole process, which is fulfilling.
But you know the journey that got there.
I'm making it for me.
No. So now if you show that to somebody else, what is it that you want that person to take away? Is it just the image, irrespective of the journey, or would you hope that they understand something about the process that led to it? Yeah.
The deeper hope is that your work is creating, and I'll use we can use both. That's creating both an affect and an effect.
Okay.
Right? That the work is eliciting some sort of response from the viewer. That's what we do with art. The challenge, and what I hope is, right, I'm not so concerned about necessarily the exact pixels or the items that are within the frame.
Yep.
It's hopefully what that combination of things are doing that evokes something, a feeling, a response, an interest, an intrigue. I can, the fascinating ways you can manipulate a response through visual cues, right? This is it's the science behind the art.
Yep.
However, I know very well that very quickly you could even learn down to the individual person, because I should back up and say previously what you would buy is you're buying the perspective of that photographer.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
You're seeing the world through their eyes.
Yes. And that's the human connection.
However, that can be mimicked quickly by the style.
Yep.
Right. So if I have a very very obvious visual cue that's one of Sean, that's the way he photographs a scene and a frame. AI, if they can't do it today, they'll do it tomorrow.
Right. Yes.
And even within there, the hope is that whether I create or somebody else creates an image through AI use or all curated by hand, let's say, human endeavor, what you're also paying for is the deep, and we've talked about this before a little bit, but especially in our photography episode, what you're paying for is that deep expertise of the journey. So the actual item that you're getting, whether it's an NFT or like an actual print or something, that in many ways is like the tip of the iceberg.
It's got a provenance behind it. And this is where I wanted to go, because I think that this spills over to AI generated stuff, because of course, at a very, very shallow level, you can look at AI generated stuff and say, that's pretty, that's nice.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether there are a set of learned skills to understand how to extract even more value, because you know where it's come from and what the human meaning behind it is.
Yeah.
And if we can do that, I think a lot of the challenges here dissolve. So for instance, if you go back to Studio Ghibli, films and movies. If you fully appreciate the art and the artisanal effort that's gone into producing those movies, the human story behind them, that is utterly different to watching something that has been machine generated.
Yep, that has been
and I wonder
rotoscoped, basically.
That's right. And I wonder whether this is the more important thing here. We actually learn to develop an appreciation, an understanding of human-generated art. Not so it negates the AI stuff. I think there's still a huge amount of value there, but we understand and we learn how to distinguish between AI value versus human value.
Yeah, and I think I can't remember. I think we touched on this a little bit before, but sometimes it is that recognition of the care and intent that went behind something.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting, and I think about this kind of a lot as we think about digital media and art creation, right? Is even in a purely, I'm going to use air quotes again on a podcast, but I'm vibecasting this, so you probably already knew I was using those air quotes. Right. So even if I were to create a traditional human-led piece of digital art, I'm going through tools. You're using these electronic digital tools. I'm less concerned about, again, that output and what it looks like.
Right.
So stay with me here for a second, because I'm going to weave and wander. But so in the same way that someone can do a quick, fire off a quick input into an image generator, they could get an amazing image with just a one-off shot.
Yep.
That's possible.
Yep.
It's also very possible, and the analogy of just being lucky with your camera and just popping up.
Yes. Yeah. In the right time, in the right place.
Without any experience, without any knowledge, it's not very common, but you can get lucky, and you can just grab something that is tremendous, amazing, that even you yourself may not be able to replicate.
Right.
Now, so I'm less concerned about that. And even as the tools change and we think about increasing use of AI, what you can see it again, going back to it's what's underneath the water to extract because, and going back, I mean, I even use the example of like the work that you have created with Midjourney. Like we were just talking about that earlier, that was not a one-shot deal.
That's right. It's a process.
And you were working with the tool through the means that the tool provides to change what you were getting as an output.
Exactly.
I like that. I don't like this. Give me more of that. Give me more of this. That is an artistic process of getting to a final state of a thing. And so I'm maybe I'll get hate mail for this, but I'm like, even as a digital artist myself, I'm less concerned about AI being able to just like step in front of me, because also I'm not relying on it as like a main form of income. Right. But from a tools perspective and a creation perspective, it's like, it's a new way of getting art. It's a new way of generating content. Bad or good, don't know. But I think that's where, for me, that's where it's exciting is like, play with it, push it.
I'm absolutely with you. So even if you're looking at the cutting edge of using AI, where there's a human story, where there are human decisions, where there's human expression in the choice of what you decide to share, that I think becomes incredibly exciting and liberating, because as you say, we've now got a new set of tools and tools that enable people that haven't been able to express themselves before to express themselves. So go to that example of relatively young kids. They now have tools that enable them to translate what's happening inside their head, what's happening inside their feelings, their soul, into something that they can share with others.
Absolutely.
In a way that they've never been able to do before.
And I think, I realized I hadn't brought this piece in, and I know we need to sort of start circling the airport here to land this plane. But I think what you were just talking about also resonates with me with this idea of the fan. Bringing in, there's long-standing this idea of fan art. You can categorize it however you want: fan appreciation, fan fiction, fan art, whatever. But it is when you have an association to something that exists, right? A story, a franchise, whatever it might be, that it in some way resonates with you strongly enough where you want to create something that also exists in that world that you make. Or that, somebody, in this case, like with the Studio Ghibli stuff, you might say, well, that speaks to me in a way that I feel seen. It's where mentally I exist in that world. And I want to be able to create something that is my my fingerprint, if you will, in that world.
Yes.
So for fan stuff, it's also interesting, which kind of raises this question of, well, in some ways, when you have this fan art or the ability to create your own version, does that rob the the studio, for example?
Yep.
Or does that create, in some ways it's like the Streisand effect, right? Where now people like myself who I have never watched those films, I'm interested to watch them.
See, and that's it. And that's actually exactly where I wanted to go with this. Yeah. Before I go there, though, we need to mention a quote from Miyazaki that's been going around, basically saying, I haven't got the quote in front of me, but it's basically the essence of it is he detests artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And people have been using this as an argument against what OpenAI have done. But that quote came from a number of years ago. So so things have changed so completely since then. I actually don't think that is entirely relevant. However, it does bring in the question of what happens when the creator of something really viscerally does not want any part of this AI world. To what extent is there art now public property because people begun to assimilate it into their lives versus how much control should the original creator have?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, the quote, I pulled it up. I don't have the year on it yet, but but the quote was because he was, and I saw a video clip of this as well.
Yeah.
He's in a room talking to people who are developing like AI tools with the intent. He asked them, like, what's the intent? And it's for a machine to draw as well as a human.
Yes.
And the quote that he has is that he believes that it's an insult to life itself.
Right.
So in case there was any confusion
that was then, and I'd love to know sort of what the attitude is now, but you can understand that if this is the craft that defines who you are. And yet, getting back to your point, and this is what I find interesting here. So that is a creator perspective. And yet, if this ability for anybody now to use ChatGPT to generate these images sparks interest in them, they're suddenly interested in the process. They're interested in Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli and what they've done. They find out about the human labor and the human love that goes into these movies. They get excited about watching the original human-generated movies. Is this not a good thing where you've suddenly got an explosion of interest in what it fundamentally means to be human in this industry?
Yeah. And I would add another layer deep on that, which is also not only, as you mentioned, but also understanding how a medium can have an impact on the viewer, right?
Yes.
So also understanding like why do these mean so much to the people who care so deeply about them? And how can I tap into my own version of creating those types of emotional connections or responses?
And it gets to this highly philosophical idea of, is the creator legitimately allowed to control the responses of the people that engage with their art?
Yeah. And I think, that's a tough one to answer because, but I mean, you can, I mean, hey, there's Star Wars, Star Trek. I mean, right. You put the Marvel universe, you put these massive fandoms out there. Yes, the owner will try to clamp down on things that are copyright, where they can, of course, because there's a economic model.
It is ultimately generative. People take these ideas and make them their own and build on them.
And there's a piece of that I think as humans in a society, in a culture where we're creating stories, once you put that story out into the world, it's no longer, you no longer have control over what happens.
Yep.
It's the right to learn, the right to read, the right to be moved.
Yes.
Once that has happened.
The right to be human. As you assimilate these stories and you build on them and make them your own.
Once it is out there, right? As long as you're not trying to steal the original or in some ways, misrepresent or whatever, it's bigger than you. It's bigger than the studio. It's bigger than the industry. It's out there.
Right.
You can't take that idea and bottle it back up and say only a few people are allowed to experience that idea. At least not yet. We don't have brain chips. At least,
right.
Yeah, at least we don't have to worry about that yet.
I can see this being one of the more controversial episodes. So if you are really frustrated with what you're hearing, tell everybody else so they have to come and experience it for themselves.
That's right. No, it is interesting because, I think, this is not going to be the end because this is yet another instance. And then, we didn't even mention, OpenAI also has a history of this. Going back to their voice stuff with originally wanting the actress.
You've just gone
Scarlett Johansson.
Thank you. Yes.
Who famously voiced the AI in Her.
Yeah, that's right. And it felt like OpenAI were emulating her voice, even though they claimed they weren't. It was remarkably similar to the movie.
They wanted her. They wanted. Let me clarify. They wanted Scarlett Johansson to be the voice of OpenAI.
Yes.
She repeatedly said no.
Yep.
And then, of course, the voice, when you hear it, sounds very much like. But of course, their claim, which is they hired an actress who sounds just like her to do it or whatever. But again, it's like and even there's more rules and laws around, especially for celebrity like impersonations, and there's a lot more around that. But even still, that's out of your. They are legally able to, if you can have someone who sounds, I mean, there's only so many, vocal prints we can come up with as humans. And if you have someone who sounds like you can use their voice.
Right.
And, then there's this thing of like, again, it's bigger, it's out there. What do you do?
So I would say, and I don't think there is anything cut and dried here.
No.
So we've covered a lot of ground, and people can probably get a sense of sort of where we're both coming from. But I will admit, I do not know what the answers here. I can talk about sort of the boundaries for how we think about them, and I have opinions, but those opinions may change.
Yep.
So I'm actually really interested to know how other people are grappling with this.
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah.
Drop us a line. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can get to us through, you can send an email if that's your preferred method of communication.
If you're over about 50 years old, yes.
To hello@modemfutura.com. Yeah, you can drop us a line there. And let us know, because, I mean, and if it helps people listening, right, they hear us talk about all these kind of things. We both, like myself, I'm always in a state of fluid flux on how I feel about this stuff.
Right.
Even just with the image that I did in the Studio Ghibli of us, I'm conflicted of whether or not I should post that.
Right.
I think I will, so people can see it as we are talking about
example.
it.
Yes, yeah.
But with a lot of language around it of like, this was an experiment, don't hate me. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm conflicted about those, because same thing. Yeah. It's like, I don't know if I should, and it changes as things move. And again, how you change on your perspective of scale and time.
Right,
and
yes.
Are we talking about all of humans, or are we talking about very specific harm to a person, or,
right.
It changes. It's constantly fluid.
Yeah. Which makes it exciting.
It's crazy.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm sure this will not be the last time we end up talking about IP issues and generative AI. But yeah, we encourage you to check these tools out, play with them. Let us know. And again, reach out. Let us know how you're feeling about these. And it would be nice to see who else is struggling with these ideas as well. Yeah.
We should wrap it there.
Let's call it. We'll turn the vibe down now as we're coming to an end. So Andrew, awesome. Again, thanks. I love these conversations. It's so much fun just to be able to wander all through these weird, squishy mental spaces.
Yep.
With you. I
always
really
a pleasure,
Sean.
Sean.
Fantastic. And again, all the things that we couldn't quite quote or couldn't quite come up with, I will look those up now, and I'll put those in the show notes so you can jump to them, and you can use them in your next conversation with certainty that you know what the actual Jeff Goldblum quote was. So yeah, we'll see you. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode of Modem Futura. Thanks.
Demodulating signal.
Modem Futura is a production of the Future of Being Human initiative at Arizona State University. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. To learn more about the Future of Being Human initiative and all of our other projects, please visit us on the web at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu.
End transmission.